Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. I'm Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by my co-host Gail Schimmel.
Hi Fiona.
Hi Gail, how has your writing week been?
My writing week has been very interesting. Anybody who listens to us regularly, and I assume everybody listening has listened to every episode we have ever produced, and if you haven't, go back and listen. Anybody who's done that will know that I went through a patch where I was writing a rom-com. And then I stopped. And I stopped out of a weird double fear. And the one fear was that the book was terrible. And the other fear was that the book was brilliant and I would have to write rom-coms for the rest of my life. And I stopped writing. And I literally, because what I have done is I have gone back and I have reread it. And I stopped writing mid-thought. It's like really in a very strange place to have stopped writing a book. But I went back and I reread it. And it is not terrible. Mm-hmm. And I decided that I'm going to finish that book. So I have gone back to it and the discipline of it and finding that very different, lighter voice again. And I'm having quite fun. How about you, Fiona? What are you up to?
I am still struggling to find my stride as the new year gets going. There's still a lot going on in the house. The children have not all disappeared off to their final destinations for the year. It feels very bitty and scattered and difficult to get going. And I feel as though there isn't a sort of clear hour in the day for me to sit down and really concentrate. And because I don't have an hour, I don't really want to do anything. And so I've mostly been doing nothing and it doesn't feel good.
I can hard relate to that. I've really been struggling with procrastination. And I have to tell you, I had an experience a few days ago where it was like I tried to do my writing in the course of the morning and get my best brain for my writing because I have a very finite amount of brain available. But it was 5 to 4 and I hadn't written. And when I don't write in a day, I feel a little bit depressed. So I wasn't feeling great. At 4 o'clock, I feed the animals. That is one of the non-movable things of my day. If I'm home at 4, that's when and they start coming. So I was sitting at my desk, staring at my computer. There were 2 dogs and 2 cats watching me. And I thought, I have to feed them at 4. I'm going to write for these 5 minutes. Just so that I get a few words onto this page. And I looked up and it was 20 past 4 and I'd written 800 words.
Wow.
And I think there's just something, and I've had to do it again every day. Find that, okay, all you have to do is a few minutes. I think there's something about not aiming at an hour.
Yes.
About aiming at a very small piece of writing. And maybe all you'll achieve is a small piece of writing, but maybe you'll get in the zone.
And a small piece of writing is still better than nothing, which is what I've been achieving lately. I love that idea, and I'm going to try it today.
Do it 5 minutes before you're supposed to feed the pets.
And then suddenly look up and they've all died of starvation.
Yeah. And you've got cats, so they'll definitely have died of starvation.
Okay, I love that tip, and I'm definitely going to try it. And Gail, what have you been reading or watching or listening to?
So I read on the advice of my friend Georgie, who you know always gives very good advice. I read a book called I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman.
Yes, I've been hearing about this.
It's a very interesting book in that it is a TikTok phenomena of an old book. It was written quite some time ago. I don't have the exact facts at my fingertips, but it's an old book that TikTok rediscovered. Wow. And everybody's reading it and it's on a lot of the lists and it's really, and I was resistant because the description of the book says 29 women and a child are locked in an underground cage, never seeing sunlight. And I was like, oh my God, this sounds dreadful. Like that is the last thing I want to read about is 29 women and a child in a cage underground. And the implication when you read the description, I think because of the way our brains work, is you show there's going to be violence and you show there's going to be sexual violence. First of all, I can tell you there is no sexual violence, which was a huge relief. And the violence is not in the present. And it's just the most extraordinary, unusual story. And the writer takes a very peculiar, she does something very peculiar, and I don't want to spoil the book for anybody by saying what she does, but it's from a writing point of view. She takes a very unusual decision in the resolution of her story that it kind of blew me away, because it goes in the face of everything we think we have to do at the end of a book. I highly recommend it. It's an unusual book. It's a touching book. It's an extraordinary book. And it is not 30 Women Locked in a Cage Under the Ground grim at all.
Yeah, as soon as you said that, I thought of Room. And
Yes.
I thought, no, I don't think I'm up to that.
Not at all Room.
Okay.
Not at all Room.
Okay.
And I had resisted it because of that feeling. Because as much as I loved Room, I never want to read it again. It's actually a lovely book. Not a jolly book,
Yes.
but a lovely book.
Brilliant.
What
My
about
next
you?
read.
What about you, Fiona? What are you reading, listening to, watching?
I'm going to break the rules a little bit now and talk about something that I have not watched yet.
Okay.
It's this show called Heated Rivalry, which my daughters are watching, and it seems as though everybody is watching right now, even though it's not strictly available in South Africa. I think you might have to check out some dodgy sites to access it, although I'm sure it will still arrive on our shores. But it's such a phenomenon, and I've been kind of watching things about it because I kind of feel as though, is this really for me? Is it a little bit trashy? Will I really enjoy it? So I've been watching things about it rather than watching it, and trying to get to the bottom of why has it been such an incredible hit, especially with women, from sort of Gen Z up to probably elder millennial and maybe some Gen X as well. Women love this show. And my best theory at the moment is that it is an antidote to the dating apps, that kind of mentality of when you are getting to know someone and it's not going perfectly, you should ghost them, you should withhold yourself, you mustn't commit, you mustn't be vulnerable, you must build this kind of wall around yourself, just connect for a moment and then immediately disconnect, which I think many younger people are finding extremely traumatizing. And this show seems to be about emotional vulnerability, especially on the part of men, commitment, not being too afraid to sort of jump in with both feet into a new relationship. It just seems to be the anti-Tinder show at the moment. Okay. And I think that is only one aspect of why it's so popular and why it seems to be hitting such a nerve. But I am very rapidly getting to the point where I am going to watch it.
I think you have to.
And I'd be interested to hear any of our listeners who might have watched it let us know if it hit for them.
I've also seen bits about it, and you know how Facebook shows you a snippet of a show. I've seen snippets of it. It's based on a book, am I right?
It is, yes.
We could maybe cheat and read the book.
I believe that the books aren't quite as good as the show.
Interesting.
Which is weird and unique.
Yeah. Yeah. And am I also right? Ice hockey features.
It is. It's all about ice hockey.
So that's the thing I think that it would be putting me off, that and the having to find a dodgy site, because I'm not clever like that. So I might have to wait until it comes to a non-dodgy site, and not out of any judgment, just out of a lack of technical expertise.
So speaking of books that are hits, somebody who has written many of those is our guest today. Our guest today is Mike Nicol. Mike is the author of the Mace Bishop series of thriller novels, also the Pescado series of thriller novels, a whole bunch of standalone novels, and an extraordinary collection of non-fiction books as well. Mike won the Ingrid Jonker Poetry Prize in 1980, which was a surprise, and we definitely are going to talk about that.
Maybe not a surprise to him, Fiona. A surprise
it came
to
as
us.
a surprise to us.
I beg your pardon, it was a complete surprise.
His most recent book, published by Pan Macmillan, is Falls the Shadow, which is the start of a new series, which we are absolutely delighted to hear about and want to know more about. Mike, thank you so much for your time. We are delighted to welcome you in the studio.
And thank you. This is a great honor. I've long heard about the two of you on this program, and it's really nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And we always start in the same way. We are going to ask you, how has your writing week been?
Actually, it's been good. After I need to backtrack a bit, actually. Falls the Shadow, I wrote and finished writing at the end of 2023. I then decided that I would go straight into book 2, which is called Firing Line. And that comes out next February. So by the time I got to the end of Firing Line, I thought, whoops, you haven't lined up a publisher. You're going into this new series. You're already 2 books down. What are you going to do about this? So it was this mengelmus of all sorts of emotions about what I did. Anyway, I went out and found Aoife Lennon-Ritchie as the agent, and things went from there. Pan Macmillan bought the book in South Africa, which was really great. But by that stage, I'd already started on number 3. And I finished number 3 in December 25. And because one book kind of almost runs into the next, I thought you'd better not sit around just enjoying the view, and I do have a lovely view of False Bay. You'd better get stuck into number 4. I have absolutely no idea what number 4 is going to be about. So I thought, well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to begin writing, which I did Friday last week and continued on up until this morning when you interrupted my writing process. Thankfully. It's a very slow process. So, if I'm lucky, we'll get through 250, 300 words a day, if I'm lucky. At the moment, life is a little hectic here because we've had our granddaughter staying with us for the week, so we've had to get her to school and brought back and all that kind of stuff, which you know all about, but we've forgotten about, and now I've had to learn about all over again. It's fine when one's in one's 40s. It's not so fine later on, let me assure you. But anyway, be that as it may. So I am into number 4, and there are 2 stories running in it, as always tends to be the case, I think. So, I mean, I sit every morning. I get up as close to 6 o'clock as I possibly can and sit down and type. I type straight into a laptop. I was very fortunate. My national service, the great thing the South African Defence Force gave me was a typing skill. They taught me to type with all 10 fingers.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, no. It's the best thing that ever happened to me. So I can go straight into it like that. And it's served me ever since. So I'm able to put it straight into the word processor. And free advert for Scrivener, I think that's a marvelous writing program.
Okay. What do you like about Scrivener? What do you use it for?
Look, it's an incredibly complex writing program, but I've managed to hone it down to a few things. It allows me to have a split screen, which is much simpler than Word or anything like that. And it allows for a list on the one side of all the chapters and all the research stuff that one may have put into the program. And on the other side, there is a notes column. So I can, if I'm going to delete sentences, which happens all the time, what I do is I put them into the notes because I hate having to rework stuff. So, it's better if it's there. I can delete it later if I don't use it again. And that's really, actually, that's about all I use Scrivener for, but I find it very easy to jump from one chapter I can have in one screen, and I can have the new chapter in another screen. And when you're doing two storylines, which are on alternate chapters, it's easier. It makes life so much easier.
I'm finding this very interesting because I'm struggling with exactly that problem at the moment, that you forget where you left the other character and then you have to go back and read where you left the other character and get confused about where you are in the book. Mike, you've said a lot of things that interest me. I want to start with, you said you didn't know what the fourth book was about, so you just started writing. So I'm presuming from that you are a pantser rather than a plotter. Talk to us about that. How much do you plot? How much do you pants?
Look, what had happened at the end of book 3 was they were having a discussion, and the one guy said, the colonel said, I've got something I need to tell you. That's where kind of things ended. So I thought, all right, what does he need to tell her? So I started writing that conversation again, and then I decided, no, hang on a moment, I'm going to kill him. So I killed him.
Obviously.
So he's dead within the first 5 sentences. So now what happens to what he was going to tell her?
Oh, nice.
That starts playing out.
And do you know what he's going to tell him?
I have a vague idea, and I've been watching that vague idea play out in Parliament.
Okay.
So it's a matter of taking some of that stuff and putting it into fiction, which is quite difficult because it sounds like fiction to start with.
Mike, you have been writing since the 80s, the 90s, into the 2000s, these thriller novels that are very connected to current events, very connected to the South African scene. As you go along, how do you update your research to keep track of new developments in the crime scene in Cape Town and also the policing procedural scene in Cape Town? How does that research process look?
Very difficult. I think I just need to preface all this first of all. Okay. I started writing fiction way back in the 70s. I was under this firm belief that you had to be at least 30 before you could write fiction. So the poetry all happened in the process up until I was 30, but I cheated. I started writing in my late 20s. And I managed to get through, I think it was 5 novels, all of which were absolute rubbish. But anyway, at the end of novel 5, a character appeared, and I thought, oh, this is different. So I took him into novel 6, which became The Powers That Be, which is where things started for me. Those books, because they were written during the height of apartheid, this is now during the 80s. In fact, I was writing it during the mid-80s, and I had a job in Cape Town. I lived in Muizenberg, and a lot of this book actually got written on the train ride from Muizenberg through to Cape Town. That's by the by, completely irrelevant rabbit hole, as you said. Anyway, the books were about what was going on in the country, in a way. And so from then onwards, for the next 3 other novels, which were now classed as magic realism, they were all in one way or another political. And I suppose living in the country, because politics was foremost in our minds at the time, that seemed to be the way to go. Comes 1994, and I sit there thinking, okay, what now? And I battled with another book. I spent 4 years writing another novel, and that ended up in the drawer as well. And then my partner Jill, she said to me, why don't you look at crime fiction? Now, I hadn't looked at crime fiction since I was 16. I mean, for God's sake, that is below me. I don't do crime fiction. I do literary stuff. Anyway, I went back to Wilkie Collins's The Moonstone, and I read all of Arthur Conan Doyle, and I thought, hang on a tick, there's stuff going on here. Then I got to the Americans, Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, and I thought, oh, this sounds really interesting. And I just read everything I could read. But it took another 10 years and another novel, which also ended up in the trash can, before Payback came out in 2008, I think it was. That was when I'd managed to find a way to deal with the current politics in the country through crime fiction, because effectively, to me, the crime novel is a political novel anyhow. And that was the start of it. Now, to move it on, okay. Then I get to the position where in a crime novel, you've got to have people solving a crime. Who are the people who normally solve a crime? The cops. I'd come out of a generation where the cops were an invading army. I didn't like the cops. So there's no ways I was going to have cops as the heroes in my books. So sorry guys, out you go. And I invented Mace Bishop and Pylon Busso, who were gun runners for the ANC, which seemed to me that at the time to be quite a meaningful occupation. and brought them on, and they went into the security industry where they guarded high value people and so on, because there was a lot of that sort of stuff going on. But because I'm the way I am, I got 4 books into that thing, and I then thought, no, hang on, I need a change. So once again, that really useful thing, you kill a character, came into play, and I left the Mace and Pylon series and started with Fish, and then Fish needed a partner, so Vicky Khan, who was in the security services, and she is a lawyer, so she comes to join him. It also allowed me, because I did a lot of surfing, it allowed me to, I based them I put their home in Muizenberg, and it meant I could go out on the beach and surf in order to find out how to do it. And there was a time when Jill used to ring me. She was working and I was at home writing the great South African novel. And she'd ring and the answering phone would pick up, because in those days we didn't have cell phones. And she would say, "You're out surfing again, aren't you?" And I would ring her back a couple of hours later and say, "This is really important research for me." And there we are. I was right. Just a couple of years later, I was able to use that research in a novel. So it just goes to show. I mean, it is incredibly important that one does these sorts of things. Okay, that brings us then on to the next series. Okay, so I decided, no, hang on, you've got to do something different all over again. So I decided, why not have a cop who cops the cops, right? The watchman who watches the night. And this brought Zara Dewane into my life. The interesting thing was that she'd come into my life in Hammerman as the station commander out at Saldanha. And I'd completely forgotten about that. Anyway, I started writing this book, and she was there. I'd used her name as Dewan in Hammerman. And I thought, no, that doesn't look good to me. So I put an E on the end, and that looked better. But she just grew and grew and grew. And I needed to put her into the water because Cape Town, as you know, has sea all around it. So she's a kayaker. She lives in Woodstock, so I can set things close to the city bowl. And she goes on her kayak out of Three Anchor Bay, which means that I can refer to Robben Island, and I can take her down to the luxury coast of Camps Bay where her son goes surfing. Okay, so this got nothing to do with police procedurals. But how does one do that? Now, there are 2 ways. One has a really good local person who you can tap for knowledge, and I have such an individual who works in the security industry, knows the cops inside out, so I can get that. And then there's a surprising amount available on the internet. So if you want to find out what happens when somebody gets charged, you can actually Google all this. You can see the papers that have to be presented. You can see the procedure that has to happen, what cops have to go, where they've got to do it, how they've got to do it, all the rest of it. But in the end, there's not very much of that going on. Mostly people are cornering one another. And that's, I think, the essence of the crime novel.
I want to take a step back to that young man who thought that he can't write a novel at 30 until he's 30, but can write poetry, because in my head it's the other way around. I'm like, when I'm older and wiser, maybe I'll be able to write poetry, but in the meantime, I can't. Talk to me about the poetry. Talk to me about what gave you the chutzpah to be a poet when you didn't feel that you could be a novelist, and whether you've left it behind completely or if there's still a secret poetry writing thing going on.
The poetry writing started way back. I think I was about 9 or 10 years old. What drove me to do it, I have no idea. There is no gene in the family line that I can track back to a writing gene. So why I did it, I don't know. I had to be forced to read. My mum had to forcibly take me to, in those days, the Fishhook Library. We lived in Fishhook, and make me take out a book. And she made me read it, and they actually quizzed me, my mum and dad, afterwards to make sure that I wasn't cheating. Obviously, it was a great lie. Clearly I had a future as a fiction writer. And that's how it started. And suddenly I began to find this. I'd always been read to, but suddenly finding the stories in books for myself and hearing the story in my head, in my own voice, that was captivating. But writing prose seemed to me like a hellishly hard activity and very long-winded, and, books are very thick, and how do you get to the end? And poetry is just so more self-satisfying because you can do it quickly. So I suppose I started with the poetry. Then, went to school, and you won't believe this, well, probably you will. The very first poem that I wrote was in Afrikaans.
Oh, wow.
And that's the first the first published poem I had was in Afrikaans, and it was in the school magazine. And I suppose the Afrikaans teacher must have pushed me to do it. And from there, I went back to writing in English. And then there were all these literary magazines that one had to publish in. New Coin, Contrast, all sorts of them. In Joburg, Stephen Gray did Iswi and things like that. And one had to publish in them. And once I was at university, there was much more. There were other people doing the same sort of thing. So one was encouraged, and one met other writers for the first time. And I think that was incredibly important, was meeting other people who did this seriously weird thing. Sit down with a pen and a blank sheet of paper and write lines. I mean, it's mad. So that was very helpful. And because the poetry meetings were quite small, one got to know people, one read out the stuff, there was a lot of encouragement. And I think that is what encouraged me to write poetry. And once you start writing, and once you put yourself out there, and once you start sending to publishers, to the little magazines, they start getting to know you. And London Magazine, I can remember I had to publish in London Magazine. This became the absolute goal of my life when I was, early 20s. I used to send it. This guy called Alan Ross was the editor there. I used to send him full envelopes, 5 or 6 poems at a time. In those days, you had to send a stamped addressed envelope. There was a stamp coupon that they could cash in London. And boy, those things just came back. And every time they came back, there was this little rejection slip. I got so many of these. I papered an entire wall in our Musenberg house out of my other rejection slips I got from everybody. Anyway, what came back was this thing from Alan Ross. A couple of years go by. He's been getting them from me, and his initials are suddenly on this little rejection slip. And I thought, I've got you. It's just a matter of time. And then came back one that said, almost. And then came one that said, okay, we'll take this. They used to send out proofs in those days. I mean, who would do a thing like that now? Anyway, I get the proof and I think, oh, this looks tremendous. So I make some corrections, whatever they were, send it back to him. It doesn't appear in the magazine. He writes me a letter to say, sorry, Mike, there are some poems that are good enough to go to proof, but not into print. So I thought, okay, you just got to keep on bashing away. And that's what writers need. You just have to keep on bashing away because eventually you will wear them down. And if you live long enough, you can wear them all down. So that's how the poetry went. And as I said, I had this idea that I needed to experience life. I needed to, fall in love, fall out of love, hurt myself, do all this kind of stuff before I could really put it all into a novel. And that's how it went. So from me, it went from the poetry into the prose. Am I doing it now? I wouldn't have the faintest clue how to write a line of poetry. Not a clue.
That's so interesting. Mike, there are a number of very successful South African authors walking around today who have told us that they owe their careers to your mentorship. And you are known as someone who teaches and mentors young up-and-coming writers. To what extent do you believe it is a transferable or teachable skill? To what extent is it innate talent? And what tips would you give someone who is wanting to go into that teaching space, teaching creative writing?
First of all, it's really kind of those people to say that. I might even start crying at this point. There's just so much luck in this world, really. And the luck that I had that took me into the teaching thing was Stephen Watson. He and I had this very interesting relationship. He hated my poetry to start with. He really did. He thought it was dull and boring and it was too Joburg for him. He lived in Cape Town. I lived in Joburg in those days. And anyway, when I came down to Cape Town, I went to meet him. And eventually we established a relationship. He then took me to task because in one of my early novels, I said I lived on a peninsula in the South Atlantic. And he said, you see, you can't even mention you live in Cape Town. Anyway, we got over all these things. And UCT started a creative writing MA. And he said, will you come and do a course? And just, it was 4 lectures over the first summer term or whatever it was. And I thought, wow, this is tremendous. And I'd never done this sort of thing before. It was all new. And so I went into it. And I thought it was great fun. It was really great fun. I met during the course of all this time a guy called Ron Irwin, who is, as you know, a lecturer at UCT as well. And Ron then went on to write novels and so on. And we stayed in touch. Anyway, years later, Ron gets hold of me and he says, I've been doing this online teaching, coaching, whatever you call it, with Get Smarter. There's a fiction course and there's a non-fiction course. I can't do it anymore. Do you want to take it on? So I thought, wow, yes, of course. Get Smarter very promptly said, okay, we need you to write notes for this thing. There are 10 of these things, 1 a week. You need to write at least 2,000 to 3,000 word notes for each lecture. So one did, and then people sent in, there was an exercise that they had to do and send it in, and I had to comment on it and send it back to them. And it all happened wonderfully. Then in about 2012, I think, I started realizing that what a lot of these people wanted wasn't just the nitty-gritty stuff about writing where you put the commas and the full stops and, when you introduce the character and how you do that kind of thing. What they wanted was somebody to whip them into writing the whole novel. So I thought, okay, I'll create some kind of masterclass and we'll run it over 9 months. and I'll put deadlines into it and just see what happens then. And that's how it started. It was run on Facebook as the sort of forum where everybody could meet and chat. They would send me stuff they would send me the submissions by email. I said 8,000 words top submission per deadline. There were 6 of those in the course of the year. The 7th deadline in October, they could send me everything they'd written. And I would comment all along the way. And this worked. I don't know why it worked, but it worked. And so I have Kenita Loxton, all 5 of her novels written on the masterclass. There are another 25 books by people on the masterclass that have all been published by conventional traditional publishing. That to me has just been absolutely wonderful. It is so much better, so much more interesting when one of them gets a publisher than when I get a publisher. Okay, I get excited. This is all wonderful, etc., etc. But it is even better when they do, because they're doing it for the first time. They're so excited about it. They can't believe that it's happened, but it has. And it is just wonderful. So for me, that has been, it's just the most marvelous thing that could have happened at that point in my life. Fortunately, I think because I've been around a long time and because I've done a lot of different stuff and because of the knocks, in fact, the knocks have been the most important thing. I'm able to help them. And I think what writers need more than anything else is encouragement. And that's what I try to do in the masterclass. I do not bullshit them. If I think something is rubbish, I tell them it's rubbish. I'm not going to just be there and say, no, this is fine and fine. But what I'm trying to do is encourage them to finish the whole book. And then once they finish the whole book, to try and get a publisher and start another one. And that seems to have worked. So, I mean, the masterclass, I'm about to start another one next week. And I couldn't live without it. It's just tremendous fun. It's just so nice seeing these people come into their own. And so the teaching has been, as I said, I was just lucky. What eventually happened in 2019 was Get Smarter told me to go away. They had been bought out by an American institution and they no longer had space for creative writing. So I thought, okay, start your own. So I did. But you need to be a marketing genius and I am not that. So the masterclass continues, but the short courses I've stopped.
Well, hopefully anyone listening who's interested in becoming a writer will now have an idea what they can do. And that's why I'm going to ask you something really cheeky, which is from all this teaching. We have a lot of listeners who are wannabe writers. Do you have any top pieces of advice that you give a new writer? Kind of like a top 5, these are your best pieces of advice. Just give us all the value of the masterclass without signing up.
Now you've caught me on the hop. I don't know. I mean, I just, the most important thing is to start the writing process. And it doesn't matter how it starts, because to me, even if you write 4,000, 5,000 words and suddenly you realize it's not right, it's not working, you can go back and you can start again. So it's the courage to start again that is the most important thing in writing, to me, at any rate. The other most important thing in writing is reading. If you're not a reader, you are going to battle. If you're going to write in a genre, you need to know what that genre does, because they all do different things and they all do them differently. So you do need to know what's going on if that's what you want to do. I came across romantasy just recently, and my granddaughter advised me not to read it. She said it will destroy your mind and you will be perverted forever. Clearly, it's not something I'm going to rush into writing after that advice. But if you want to write it, then you need to know what it does. just as you need for crime fiction or for a thriller of any kind or a spy novel or even literary fiction. One needs to know. The other thing I like about writing is get the main character onto the scene as quickly as possible and get the main character on so that the reader can imagine that character, because what you're doing is you're providing imagery in the reader's mind. And unless the reader can see what's going on, it's kind of no good. So the reader needs to be able to picture. So you need to get the character. You need to set the scene. Scenes are incredibly important. And that's just a scene as any movie would have a scene. You need to be able to move the character around in the scene. And then the next thing is the character must speak as quickly as possible, because in the speaking is the character. And once you, the writer, have got the sound of that character's voice, you've got most of the character. So it's those things that I think are the important thing, is get the character into the novel quickly, get the scene set, and get him or her to talk. Those are vital. They're absolutely vital.
Lovely advice. Thank you.
The other thing though, is you've got to have somebody that they're fighting against. And that doesn't mean necessarily with open swords and knives and guns. It just means argument. Somebody who disagrees with them, who gets in their way and prevents them from doing what they want to do. That antagonist is also vitally important. And then the next thing is you as the writer must really, really, really like that antagonist, because you've got to give that antagonist as much humanity as you possibly can. Because if you don't, if you despise the antagonist, the readers will pick it up and they're not going to be that interested.
That's very interesting.
That's amazing. I'm sorry, you're going to have to stop this. I've got to go and write. I'm feeling completely inspired now.
Mike, I want to go back to those 250 to 300 words that you write a day. And I'm trying to picture it. Do you write 300 words quickly once at the beginning of the day and that's it for the day? Or do you write 300 words slowly over a couple of hours? How exactly does it work? And why are you not doing the sort of 1,200 words a day or whatever?
And I'm going to add to that. Are they 300 perfect words? Do you work hard in making them beautiful and lyrical and perfect? Yeah, we really want to know about those words.
Okay. The words don't come easily, first of all, but there's a song like that, isn't there? So it's a battle. I mean, it is a battle. I might get a phrase and start with the phrase and the sentence then comes, but one could be talking half an hour to put down 10 words. And then, in the next 10 minutes, you may put down the second sentence, another 10, 15 words, whatever it happens to be. Now you've got two sentences. Those sentences have a rhythm. If that rhythm is not right, I will then start playing with the sentences and changing clauses around or knocking off words or doing whatever it happens to be. So that's why it takes so long. And what happens is I probably get, on a good day, I get 3 or 4 hours straight on, which will produce the 250 to 300 words. But I will come back at those words later in the afternoon, probably. And shortly before, what I like doing is opening the laptop just before I go to bed. And I look at the words and immediately take out the ones I don't like or do whatever it happens to be to the other words. And that's how it happens. It's not that these things are written in stone right away. It's not that I want to live with them forever. And the next day, I could junk the whole lot and redo it. So they're not there. The next day, what I do, as the novel progresses, okay, I can't do this all the time, but I read the previous 2 days' work. So it's 500, 600, 700 words. and work through those before I begin the new stuff. And there will be changes made all the way along the line. There always is. And that's just the way it goes, I think.
I'm interested from that. When you speak to writers, as we often do, and I'm sure you've had this experience, who tell you that they write 3,000 words a day and numbers like that, and I've heard higher ones as well. What do you think about that? How do you react to that? Do you feel that they must be writing absolute rubbish, or do you feel that other people write in a different way? What's your opinion about it?
Look, there are some writers, I mean, well-established, published writers who write at that speed, and they write very well at that speed. I'm just not like that. There are new writers who also write at that speed, and often it shows. And you can go through the text with them and say, okay, you're not listening to what you're writing. You're just writing. Whereas to me, what one is doing is you're creating a story. You've got these characters in the story, but it's also got a pattern. It's got a pattern on the page. And so it's that pattern that is interesting to me. I want to know what this thing looks like on a page. I want to know if they're short sentences. Does the page look like a poem, or is it, as a Faulkner novel, solid text? Then I need to know the sound. And I think the sound thing is because of the poetry in the early days. If I don't hear the sound in the prose, I then get really worried and have to go back to do something about it. It's all these kind of things. So when I've got somebody who presents me with 2,000 words and says, I just did this yesterday, I say, okay, let's go through it and read it aloud and see what it sounds like, and look at how many adjectives you've used, how many adverbs you've used, where you've put the full stops, have you put in, all that kind of thing. I mean, many new writers think that adjectives are the best thing that they can do. They are the worst thing that you can do. Adverbs likewise. I mean, she spoke loudly. For God's sake, have a gesture. Do something, but don't put loudly in. There are other ways around that kind of problem. And I think that's what one needs to show to people, is that it comes back to that old thing. Show, don't tell. And if you can do that, then you're doing okay. And that's what one's got to try and get new writers to do. There are times when one does have to tell, I know. But if you've got a scene that's going and there are two characters in that scene and they're going at hammer and tongs, you need to be able to feel and hear the sound they're making.
Interesting.
Mike, this is something that is very much on my mind personally at the moment. So I want to know your thought process when you started this new series that begins with Falls the Shadow. Now, most people, when they've got decades of work behind them and a whole ton of work product behind them, they're thinking, oh, retirement, I'm finally going to surf or hike the mountain or whatever, do all those things that I've been putting off. And they're thinking about retiring. You were thinking a new series. I'm going in a new direction, a whole new set of characters. Has retirement ever been on your mind, or do you see yourself sort of dying with a manuscript on the go? It's personally preoccupying to me, and I'd love to know your thought process behind it.
With a bit of luck, that'll be the case. Look, it may well be that things. I realize that as one gets older, there are certain things that you do have to start guarding against. And I do think that it is possibly a little more difficult to write now than it was 20 years ago. Particularly over a long manuscript, there's just stuff you forget because you did it, 9 months, 12 months ago, and you've forgotten that element of the plot. So there are those sorts of things. But, writing has been a part of my life, as I said to you earlier, since I was 9 or 10 years old. I just can't imagine being without it. it's not that I'm trying to put the world to right. It's not that I'm trying to do anything. It's not that I've got this huge message that I want to put out there. This is just about me. I have to do this stuff because when I stop doing it, I think life's just going to go away. And so if there's an unwritten manuscript when I die, I think I will be really lucky. That would be the way to do it. I looked at John le Carré. I mean, he wrote right up to the end. And there are other writers that have done this. I mean, Don Winslow the other day, or a couple of years back, said, I'm not writing anymore. Now, he's just a bit younger than I am, a couple of years. And I thought, how can you say that? And what happened? He's just produced another book. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, writers lie all the time, really. But anyway, that's the way that we do it. But I can't, for the life of me, see a time when I would not have something on the go. Life would be unbearable. It really would.
I think.
And for my poor Jill, it would also be unbearable because she says it.
I think that I heard that Jeffrey Archer at 80 started a new series and he planned 5 books in the series, and it was his way of ensuring that he lived till 85 because he knew he wasn't going to die with them unfinished. And I think lived up to that.
Okay.
Mike, I'm very interested in the way that you use Substack. As writers, we're encouraged to use Substack, and I think a lot of people struggle with it. I think there are a lot of people who either say the same thing again and again, or kind of do really arbitrary posts in order to have the frequency. But every time one of your newsletters lands in my inbox, I read it and I'm interested in it, and it's new and it's something that catches my imagination. Talk to us about how you're using Substack and how you keep that energy for it.
I'd started, I had somebody helping me when I made the website with the short courses, and eventually we were putting out little pieces through WordPress, I think it was. And then suddenly I came across this thing called Substack. And I thought, okay, I need to move the marketing onto Substack. Marketing. And I decided what I would do, and I think I've been there 2 or 3 years now. I can't remember actually how far back it goes. I decided I'd put out, because I'm a journalist at heart, I would put out every Wednesday would be my deadline, and I would put the newsletter out every Wednesday. I'd have one Wednesday where the newsletter was short bits, and then on the following Wednesday, I'd write a longer piece that would be in some way about writing, because the people that I was targeting with direct submission through Substack was people who'd been on the writing course. So I thought, okay, if you've been there, you've got an interest in it. Maybe I can keep you interested. Maybe I can encourage you to write a book, another one. Then when by that stage, I'd already started on the Zara novels. So I thought, hang on, this is a way to write about the Zara novels and about the process that led to them without making it too obvious. Because there's nothing worse than writers sitting down saying, I had this great writing time this morning and I produced this wonderful prose, etc., etc. So I thought, okay, and particularly as the date for publication has got closer and closer, I've sort of looked at the background to how this book started, why it started in that particular way, why the character came about. And when you start looking at that, all you're doing is looking at really at pieces of your own life. You're filling in a memoir in another sense. So I found all these times when we'd gone out in our yellow combi and camped in far different places and so on. I found the green Mercedes-Benz that we'd once owned, and how all of this stuff feeds into the prose. So for me, Substack became this wonderful place where I could do all the things that I'm doing anyhow. So all the little bits and pieces. I mean, as you get it as well. There's a million bits and pieces coming through about writers and writing and all the rest of it. And it's just a matter of finding the ones that interest me and putting them up there and keeping them in that one fairly short so that I can get away with, 500 words. And then the other one, as I said, I decided, okay, how does one get to the title, which was one of the Substacks I did? Well, this is the way I got to this particular title. And this is the way, this is the way I got to the character's name. And that was another Substack. So there are all these sorts of things that one can do. What I intend to do eventually is write why Woodstock. Why did I choose Woodstock as her abode, that suburb? And I just find Substack allows one to do this sort of stuff. And I think, God, this is just wonderful. This is just made for what I want to do. So I can write the novels and then I can write about writing the novels. And there are apparently people who even read it.
There are definitely people who read it. Do you plan out your Substacks ahead of time? Do you have a list of Substacks that are coming?
They're two ahead, but they could change. And it's like, because you asked earlier and I didn't actually answer the question properly, pantser or plotter, I fly by the seat of my pants, to use that expression, which is where the term comes from. Plotting I just find incredibly difficult and incredibly boring. And then it becomes to me like you're filling in the jigsaw pieces. With this book number 3 that one just finished, I did go onto an AI, and I said to them, okay, this has happened. How does the story end? And they plotted it out, or it plotted it out for me. And I thought, my God, this is so boring. So I junked that and did my own thing. So, I mean, it does have uses. It's a really good research tool, but boy, at the moment, it doesn't plot well.
A reassuring thing. We're still needed, at least for now.
We are.
Mike, by the time this podcast comes out, Falls the Shadow will be on shelves already, and you'll probably be in the thick of the book launch circuit. But can you tell our listeners now about the new book, the new series? You've told us how you found your protagonist, Zara, and took her from a previous book. But what will be new to your readers? What will be familiar? Are you going to draw on characters from other series? And what was kind of the impetus behind this whole series?
Okay, let me just start with the last one. The impetus was because I needed to do something differently to the PI novel and the security company novel. And the obvious choice was to do some sort of cop novel. So that was the impetus to do this thing. There were characters that I had left in some of the previous novels still standing, which is unusual for me. And I thought that one of the main characters in Falls the Shadow is a colonel called Kaiser Wuller, and he had been in a book 4 back called Agents of the State. And in that book, he had protected the president and he'd been shot and put into a wheelchair. So I thought, okay, I need to bring him back. So he came back along with his wife, who I called Lady because I decided to use the Macbeth story for them. So I rewrote Macbeth to fill in as part of the subplot for Falls the Shadow. Which was really nice because I love Macbeth. It also meant that I could bring in a witch, which is great too. And at one point I could bring in a dagger, but I could do it as a digital dagger rather than one that appears ghostly in the fog at night. So there were all those things. There was another character who came about in the Fish and Vicky called Janet. Janet is she lives on the street. Fish takes her in and lets her stay in his backyard. And eventually I managed to contrive a meeting between Janet and Zara. And Janet then goes to live in Zara's backyard and she continues to have her beach house with Fish in Muizenberg. And Janet was just a character that I just had to have. She was funny. She said things weirdly and she just brought a whole dimension of down-to-earthness into the novel. So And I just loved it when she walked onto the page. It was just tremendous fun. And she and Zara get on very well, so that also helped hugely. So they're the main characters that come back. Then there was another character that I had actually killed, or thought I'd killed, Tamara Gould. And I thought, no, I need her. She's head of the Mongrels gang, and I need her. So I looked at the killing scene, and I thought, what I can do is just say that the bullet scraped past her face and caused this huge dent in it, whatever it was, and she had to go to hospital, but she didn't die. So I wrote that into the text and brought her back to life, because sometimes you do need people that you've tried to kill off previously. So it's all that has gone into creating the new set of characters and the new stories that they deal with. And in Falls the Shadow, the main story there is gun heisting, and cops who are heisting guns that should be going off to Pretoria for melting down, etc., etc. And because of the gun culture that we have in this country, which is absolutely horrendous, especially out in the Cape Flats where, it's like a war zone most of the time. So it gave me a chance to get into that whole side of cop life and the sorts of things that they're up against. And Zara is hated because she comes in and disturbs their lives. So, she's not liked by them. And that to me creates a lot of interest in that for me. Here's a character who's not liked by anybody, but she's supposedly doing good things or is doing good things. It's that tension that you can create, in the character that I just think is the stuff that makes me come back to the word processor every day, is to get back to that sort of thing.
You said something in that answer that makes me wonder a new thing about your process, because you said almost like surprised. You said she and Zara get on very well, and I managed to engineer a meeting between them and they get on very well. And it made me wonder, to what extent do you feel in control of your characters? And to what extent do your characters take over? And I once heard a writer say, all I have to do is take dictation while they speak. I don't have to decide what they do. They take me there. And I felt a little bit jealous that my characters very seldom do that to me. To what extent does that happen to you?
Whoever that was hit the nail on the head. I think what happens every day is you've got to get back into the head of the character. And the way to do that for me is to hear the character speak, as I've said before. Once that happens, then literally the rest of the plotting just falls into place, because what that character does and says, suddenly you think, okay, if you've said that, then this has got to happen. And if this happens, then that happens. And so it goes. And if I do any plotting, it's in that sense that I may plot what is going to happen in this particular scene for the next, 1,000 words or whatever it happens to be. But the way to do that is to hear the character. And then they do write it. She particularly, of all of them, writes herself in the most amazing way. It has come as a complete and utter surprise to me, that I sit there and I think, well, what are you doing here? You're just the fingers on the keyboard. So yes, it does happen that way.
Very jealous.
And it happens for you that way too, I'm damn sure.
Very occasionally.
Not as often as we'd like. So, Mike, when you're not taking dictation from your characters or doing the school run, it sounds like, what have you been reading or watching or listening to lately that's made an impression?
Well, I've just picked up a book called The Cutting Room by a writer called Attica Locke. She is American and she lives down south. We bumped into one another. The crime industry has these extraordinary festivals, particularly in France. And she and I were on a panel together way back, I think 2016 or something like that. And because we were the two outsiders, because the rest of the panel were all French and they were all terribly sophisticated and all that sort of stuff as they tend to be. And she and I sat there kind of looking one another in the eye and feeling really like the peasants. She wrote the first book, her first book was Black River Rising or Black Water Rising. I can't remember that exactly. And this, I hadn't found any of her other stuff, but in the secondhand bookshop, I came across this one and I thought I must read this. So I immediately took it out and read it. And it's glorious stuff. If you want to know what is happening in America right now, go and read The Cutting Room, because it's just, I thought, hang on a moment, this thing was written in 2012 or something. But it feels like it's Trump's America. And it was tremendous. Apart from the fact that she also just writes very well. You can hear the prose. When the characters speak, you can see them instantly. So it's tremendous. And then what I did, because I do this from time to time, immediately after doing that, I picked up Faulkner. Now, I have a love for Faulkner, and I think you either read Faulkner because you really love him or because you have to for a university course. But when I discovered Faulkner and I discovered all those sentences that go on for pages after pages after pages, I just thought that this man writes music and I can hear this music. So I've gone back to reading Intruder in the Dust, which kind of is forms this lovely duality with the Attica Locke book. It's the same part of the world, but it's set, I think, 30 or 40 years apart. But the same kind of things are going on. And once again, you read Intruder in the Dust and you think America hasn't moved at all. They're not at all. And this is part of their problem, I think. So those are the two books that have really engaged me. The other book, and unfortunately I cannot remember the author's name. It's a non-fiction book. It's called The Darkening Age. And it is about the Christian demolition of the Roman palaces, Roman statues, all that the ancient world had produced. When Christianity started, there were these barbarian hordes that went around chopping off noses and decimating faces and lopping off heads and all the rest of it. And this book called The Darkening Age, written by a woman in England, she writes brilliantly. She's funny apart from anything else, very cryptic, very ironic. And I just thought this book was completely and utterly tremendous. So, unfortunately, I can't remember her name, but I'm sure I can Google it and come back to you. but there are 3 books for you.
Fantastic. Those are 3 wonderful recommendations. Thank you. And Mike, we hope that everyone checks out Falls the Shadow, which is the first book in a new series published by Pan Macmillan. Will be available in all bookstores by the time this comes out. We know it's going to be fantastic and we hope it does wonderfully well. Thank you so much for your time.
And thank you too. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Gail, when we were chatting to Mike at the end of our recording, you said to him that you always know it's been a great podcast recording when you are just itching to jump up and go and write. And that's how you felt today, isn't
That's
it?
how I felt today. I'm quite resenting that we even have to carry on recording this after bit because I want to get to my desk and I want to start writing.
What was it that was so inspirational about talking to Mike?
It's interesting trying to put your finger on it because I think it was just the whole package of his energy about writing. He's not in the very first flush of youth, but he is an energetic man with a lot of ideas and a lot of, you can see his writing career is going to carry on, and that energy I found inspiring. And then he said a lot of really practical, useful writing tips. I mean, I think this is one of our probably leading episodes if you're wondering how to write and you want some good, solid tips for me, there were a lot of them that even though maybe I know them, are also so good to be reminded and see it in a slightly different way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Like what in particular?
So in particular, and I've just got to put my reading glasses on to look at my notes, I was very interested in the things he said about character, about get to the main character as quickly as possible, get the main character speaking as quickly as possible. And those are things like, I know start in the action. I know dialogue is a very useful way of doing that, but just the way he phrased it reminded me and inspired me. And then also that very interesting point about you've got to love your antagonist.
Yes. I'd never heard that before.
Never heard that before. Not sure that I have always loved my antagonists. I've enjoyed writing them. I love writing my antagonists, but have I loved them as characters? I don't know. Very interesting.
You were saying humanize them, make them as human as possible because that'll make them more interesting. Never quite heard it that way before. Fascinating.
And something to think about, something to really think about.
Definitely.
What about you, Fiona? What did you take from that?
Well, it was a thread that ran through what he was saying, and it was in, where he said, oh, I wrote 5 books and they were all trash, and then another 10 years went by and then I wrote another book, but it was also trash. So then I tried again, and then I took one character from this book and made him more interesting. And just that incredible persistence and resilience to the point where, and I think he was being completely serious, that he wallpapered a room in his house with his rejection slips. Now that's something that we joke about, but I think he actually did it. And that to me is just remarkable. It just shows a level of dogged self-belief that is not common these days. I think it's more common in an older generation where you literally wear the publisher down.
He said, keep bashing away. I've underlined it. Keep on bashing away and eventually they'll give in.
Yes.
It's a very different way of thinking about having a book accepted.
Yes.
It's also, I have to say, quite male. I think it's something that as women writers, doesn't come as naturally to us, and we need to be like that. We need to have that self-belief that I think is for some reason, and God knows what it is, society, biology, who knows, we can have that debate for years, but for some reason comes a little bit less naturally to us.
Yes, and I think it's a good lesson we need to learn from writers like Mike.
Absolutely.
So if any of our listeners have read one of Mike Nicol's books, if you've read the new one, Falls the Shadow, which is available now from Pan Macmillan, or if you have been mentored online or in person by Mike Nicol and want to tell us about that experience, please get in touch. We are on all social media across the board, and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.